Alright, so here's my tutorial on how to make ambient drone. You're listening to one I made earlier. I'll fade that out and we'll get started with a new patch, and I'll hopefully show you how some of these techniques work. So I've got a blank template here. I've got the MindMeld mixer and some reverb and delay and just a couple of plugins to sort out my vocal chain. So I'm recording my crappy voiceover straight into VCV as well. So the first thing we need is an oscillator or a VCO. And I want to use one called warp core because I need something that's polyphonic and also something where you can vary the timbre quite a lot. If you think about a regular kind of analog style oscillator, it just does normal waveforms like square waves, saw waves. There's not really much you can vary with that sound. You can use a low pass filter, obviously analog drones are cool, but a square wave through a resonant low pass filter is kind of not that interesting to me. So personally, I like to use something more complex. Digital oscillators, wavetables work quite well for this. And I'm going to use warp core today, which uses phase distortion, which was Casio's kind of synthesis they used in the CZ synthesizers back in the 80s. So I'll just turn this channel down a bit, and you can hear what happens with this. You've basically got a sine wave when you first connect it. I'll just turn the reverb and delay down a bit. Okay, and then when you start introducing the phase distortion, you basically get a more complex waveform. And you can see it on the scope as well, if I just bring a scope up. So you can see, if I just turn the time base down, you've pretty much got a pure square wave there. And then you're getting a more interesting waveform as you turn up the amount of phase distortion, which is perfect for drone. So if I just mute that for a second, the next thing I want to do is make this polyphonic so we can get a kind of chord going. I'll just stick the scope up there, and I'm going to use a module called Polyphonic. Oh, my camera's actually in the way. Where's it gone? There we go. What I'm going to do with this is just randomize it. Now again, if I put this on the scope, you can see all it does is just produce different levels here. And if we randomize that, we get different outputs. The next thing I need is a quantizer, and I'm going to use a module called Quantum so I can choose which notes to use. And then I'm going to reduce that down to, say, about 6 channels. We can tweak that later. So if I put the output from Polyphonic into Quantum, and then I need to choose some notes. So I'm going to use D minor roughly. So we'll have D, F, A. Sometimes I find if you use every single note in a scale, things kind of get muddy and it doesn't sound that good. You can accidentally get a diminished chord or something like that. So I tend to use a scale and just take a few notes out and just use kind of maybe 5 or 6 notes. So we'll have maybe, let's have the 9th as well, stick an E in and see how that sounds. Now if we take the quantized pitch out there, put it into the volt per octave, should get a chord now. So what I need to do there is reduce the range because the output from Polyphonic is a full 10 volts and that doesn't sound very good. So if I just stick that into a VCA, and if I pull the VCA down to about maybe 10-15%, then we'll get a more sensible range of octaves. Let's have a listen to that. Okay, so there you've got your basic chord, and the next thing we need to do is modulate that to make it sound more interesting. So I'm going to get another VCA, just going to copy that and stick it up to the full range, and the next thing I want is a really slow, low frequency oscillator. So I'm going to use this Bog Audio here because it's got a slow mode, so if I click slow, that's going to reduce the range. And then I'm also going to take the output from kind of reduced Polyphonic here from the VCA, and that's, I'll show you what this is doing on the scope actually if I just disconnect that a second. So if we just get a sine wave, I'll turn the time base up a bit. Let's turn the frequency up so you can see what that's doing. So there you've got a basic sine wave, and if I take the output from there, you can see what happens is we get a sine wave on each polyphonic channel. So you've effectively made that into 6 sine waves now because we've got 6 channels. Obviously, if you increase that, you get more sine waves. And because that's going into the volt per octave input, each one's a slightly different frequency, which gives you effectively, multi-channel different waveforms. So let's put that back on about 6. You can see those on scope. Now if I turn that back down, what I want to do is put that sine wave output into the VCA, and what that's going to do is just slowly fade in and out each note. So if I now take the output from warp core and stick it into the VCA, and then unmute that again, so you can hear the different notes fading in and out. I also want to spread these out in the stereo field, so I'm going to get a spread module, and I'll take that one. Okay, why have we got nothing now? There we go. That's just coming through. Maybe reduce that slightly. And what that's going to do is just spread the notes out in the stereo field. So you can hear that starting to kind of slowly change, but it's not very interesting yet. So I'm going to take a different LFO. I'm just going to copy that. Then I'm going to do the same trick with the output from that. So this is actually going to be polyphonic modulation. So instead of modulating a parameter for the whole VCO, we're going to modulate it differently for each note, which will hopefully make things sound more interesting. So if I tighten up the attenuator on there, then I'll do that again, get another one. So I don't want the same LFO modulating different parameters. And I'm going to stick that into warp B. So you can hear we've now got different notes fading in and out, and each note is getting different amounts of phase distortion. So it's just changing the timbre slightly. So instead of one continuous boring note, we've got a lot more changing. And that's really the trick with kind of ambient drone. Just modulate everything really slowly, then you get this kind of evolving sound. So there's one more thing I'm going to modulate on here. So I'm just going to copy this again. I'm not sure this is polyphonic, so I'll just use one channel on there. And I'm going to reduce the scale because we don't want too much of this. And I'm going to stick that into the internal PM level. And you can hear that's giving it a bit more variation again. Maybe just increase that to get a few more octaves. Okay, so that's starting to sound a bit more interesting. And the next trick is I'm going to copy one of these host FX modules over here. And I'm going to load up Supermassive, because if you're doing ambient, everything sounds better through Supermassive. Everyone knows that. I'm going to go for Pulsar. No, I'm not going to do Nebulae. And I'm going to use Planetarium today, I think. Give it some feedback. Okay, I'm going to just take the output from my spread module and stick it into Supermassive. I've misclicked on that preset. Let's try that again. Okay, let's give it some volume. And there you go. There's the start of quite a good ambient drone. Just let that play for a second. And you can hear you're getting some different harmonies there as the different notes fade in and out, which is just this VCA here, just fading different polyphonic channels. That's kind of okay, but I want a bit more stuff as well, so I'm going to use a second oscillator and basically do everything again and just get more of a more interesting sound. So I think for the second VCO I'm going to use surge twist. Okay, I'll just mute that for a second. Now if you haven't seen this, it's basically Platt's, the famous hardware module, but it's also polyphonic, which makes it really good for this. And I'm also going to just duplicate this. And I'm also going to duplicate the quantizer. So I want basically the same thing, but not exactly the same values. And I might change the notes as well, actually. Let's have a B flat there. G, maybe take out one of the other notes. Maybe take out the F, so it's slightly different. So I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to feed Polyphonic into a VCA to reduce the range and stick the output into quantum and put the output into the surge oscillator here. Then I'm going to duplicate the spread and use another one of those and turn the channel down slightly. That's a bit loud. Okay, I'll just take that down a bit more. Okay, so with the twist VCO, you've got a load of different models, basically different algorithms, and you can just hear what these sound like. I'll just step through them. That's the FM. Might use FM. Yeah, let's use FM. Okay, so we've got our chord going into there. And let's just start modulating it again. I'm just going to reuse some of these LFOs and use the sine wave output. And to modulate anything on the surge modules, you just click on one of these modulators and then change what you want to modulate. Okay, and actually there's one more thing I'm going to do to warp core before we carry on with this. I'll just mute that for a second. I want some vibrato on this, but it doesn't have an FM input. So I'm going to grab another LFO. I'm just going to use the stock VCV one. And then I also need an offset module, which is basically an attenuverter. Otherwise you're going to get the full range of plus or minus 5 octaves. Whatever it is, that'll sound really bad. So I'm going to right click on the scale on there. I'm going to do 0.0003. Then I need a multiple. Let's just take host FX off and then unmute this. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is take the sine wave, and again I want, just turn that down a bit, I want polyphonic modulation. So I'm going to use the FM input for the LFO and just take that out the VCV from Polycon and just change that slightly. And you should be able to see on the scope that this will give you a couple of different LFOs on each channel. Okay, so I'm going to put that into the input for offset. Then put that into one of these. That's just basically reducing it down so you get a tiny amount. Then I'll get the volt per octave input. And then that's just mixing these together. And hopefully you should hear we've now got some vibrato. Let's try a tiny bit more. There you go, so that's fairly subtle. But I do think that makes a difference, and you've got a different amount of vibrato from a different LFO on each channel. So this is one of my big things, to be honest. I try to make everything modulate polyphonically, just to make things more interesting. And that gives more of a kind of softer vintage sound. And if we stick the effects back on, once you've got tons of reverb, you can get away with a lot more modulation actually. And it just gives you a wider, kind of more symphonic sound. So there we go, and I'm going to do the same thing on this twist VCO. So I'll just take that into one of the mod inputs. I'm going to map that to pitch. Ooh, that's not right. Okay, so yeah, I know what I've done there. I'm taking the wrong volt per octave. So if I just take the volt per octave there, I'll just be lazy and use the same LFO. And I want the output from offset. Actually, let's turn it down a tiny bit. Okay, there we go. There's something I don't like about that, actually. It doesn't sound quite right. There's a kind of beating. Let's see if I can adjust anything in here. Let's have some oscillator drift. That basically detunes it, makes it a bit warmer. And we probably don't want too much. Let's try dropping the octaves down. That might sound good actually, once we've got a load of reverb on again. Yeah, I'm just going to unclick that and see what else we can change. Yeah, that's too much. You don't want to mess with the ratio probably, if that's going to make it out of tune. Like that. Yeah, I'm not liking that, to be honest. Doesn't sound quite right. So let's try a different algorithm on here. Let's try the wavetable. Okay, so I made a few mistakes on that with the twist VCO. I've edited that out. I've got this sounding a bit more like what I wanted now, to be honest. I've dropped it down an octave. And I'm using the wavetable algorithm and just modulating a few things in there. Let's just turn up the modulation a bit. Okay, so now I'm just going to copy my host FX and use another supermassive for this. Let's stick that in there and back in that channel. It just sounds so much better straight away. Okay, now let's unmute our first oscillator and turn that up slightly. So all we've got here really is two VCOs playing 6-note polyphony with the different notes fading in and out from a VCA. And then each one's going through a different instance of supermassive. And that's it. It just gives you this really big sound really easily. So there you go. I hope you've enjoyed that. If you want to mess around with this yourself, these are all free modules apart from Host FX, which is about 15-20 bucks. I'll post a patch up on Patch Storage and put a link in the description. And yeah, have fun. Hope you enjoyed this. Cheers.